welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, we seem to have controversy in all different levels and areas. Today we're going to look at the very controversial commencement speech and some other activities going on here in the Archdiocese of Boston, contrasting it maybe with the Diocese of Worcester. And it has to do with, on May 25th, Victoria Reggie Kennedy, the widow of former Senator Ted Kennedy, was the commencement speaker at the Boston College Law School commencement. And today to discuss that, we have C.J. Doyle of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Welcome, C.J.
Delighted to be here, Brendan.
C.J., could you give us a little bit of the background behind why it is that this woman is controversial, speaking at a supposed Catholic university or Catholic college?
Well, there have been two controversies, of course. One regarding her as the commencement speaker at Boston College Law School on May 25th, and the other, the planned invitation to her to speak at Anna Maria College in Paxton, the Catholic college in the Diocese of Worcester, which was ultimately withdrawn as a result of pressure from the Bishop of Worcester, Bishop McManus. And the problem with Victoria Kennedy isn't just the status of her husband or the status of her relationship with her husband, but she herself has been a longtime advocate of legal abortion, contraception, and same-sex marriage. In 2004, she wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post, the Sunday Washington Post, in which she repeatedly referred to abortion as a private moral decision, while, by the way, somewhat inconsistently castigating capital punishment as the taking of a human life. And she described those who insisted that canon law be enforced and that communion be withheld from nominally Catholic politicians who support the killing of preborn children. She called this position flawed and intellectually dishonest, and went on to come up with a whole series of essentially propaganda pieces for these pro-abortion Catholic Pauls, saying it's a terrible thing to deprive someone of communion and people have a right to Holy Communion, but never mentioning what St. Paul said, what Catholic theology has always taught, what canon law insists on, that you have to be in a state of grace, that you have to worthily receive the Blessed Sacrament, you have to worthily receive the Holy Eucharist, and if you do not do so, it's one of the most serious sins that a Catholic can commit. A Catholic bishop or a Catholic priest, in withholding Holy Communion from someone in a state of mortal sin, is actually preventing both a scandal and a sacrilege, and preventing an even more grave mortal sin. It's a charity to the offender, not only to tell them that they're violating the law of God, but also to prevent them from adding yet another, as I said, serious mortal sin to their soul, which is the unworthy reception of the Holy Eucharist. So Mrs. Kennedy, of course, wrote entirely against this position and tried to come up with this very tired, threadbare kind of liberal argument of moral equivalence, suggesting, well, why don't they withhold communion from people who oppose poverty programs, as if you have to be a socialist in order to be a good Catholic, when, of course, the Catholic religion unequivocally condemns socialism. And why don't you withhold Holy Communion for people who support capital punishment? As if there was an absolute moral prohibition in Catholic teaching regarding capital punishment, which there is not. And of course, all about other issues and secondary issues. But the op-ed piece was a series of omissions, deceptions, and diversions intended to justify the apostasy and the treachery and the treason of men like her husband and men like Senator Kerry and others who are nominally Catholic but regularly vote money to kill children, to keep abortion legal. And Mrs. Kennedy also said in her op-ed piece, by the way, that we're being persecuted, or these demands are being made simply because we refuse to criminalize abortion. We refuse to make abortion illegal. Now, Ted Kennedy didn't get the Champions of Choice Award from NARAL, and the Kenneth
NARAL is the National Abortion
Rights and Reproductive Rights Action League. And he didn't get the Kenneth Edelman Award from Planned Parenthood simply because he refused to criminalize abortion. He spent his entire career, as do most pro-abortion Catholic politicians. He isn't exceptional in this regard, trying to do everything possible not only to keep abortion legal, but to keep it entirely unrestricted, opposing any restriction on abortion, including partial birth abortion, trying to keep it publicly funded. Senator Kennedy, was opposed to the Hyde Amendment, believed in Medicaid funding of abortion, trying to keep it as part of American foreign policy and American foreign aid, opposing, conscience protections for Catholics, that were pro-life in the medical profession, the nursing profession, the pharmaceutical profession, and of course supporting the FACE Act and the FOCA Act and buffer zones and things that would restrict the free speech rights and the freedom of religion of pro-lifers. So this is, again, a very disingenuous position that Mrs. Kennedy took about when we simply don't want to make abortion a criminal procedure. It's much more than that. They do everything possible, again, not only to keep it legal, but to keep it unrestricted and to keep it to the extent that they can publicly funded, and of course to oppose the constitutional rights of Catholic pro-lifers. And of course, under the position taken by Mrs. Kennedy and by her late husband and by others like Senator Kerry and Senator Leahy and Senator Dodd and Senator Mikulski and others, essentially anyone that was a faithful practicing Catholic could not be selected for a federal judicial position or for a Supreme Court decision. So here these people are arguing that these nasty, mean-spirited pro-life Catholics are trying to deprive them of Holy Communion, when in fact their position is that anyone who's a faithful pro-life Catholic should be discriminated against in federal employment, particularly in the judiciary. So again, this was an exercise in hypocrisy and intellectual dishonesty by Victoria Kennedy. Now, she also supports same-sex marriage, and Bishop McManus of Worcester, I think very correctly pointed this out to Anna Maria College. Anna Maria College had invited her to come and speak, and this is the small Catholic college in the Diocese of Worcester. And under pressure from the bishop, that invitation was withdrawn. Now, Anna Maria, subsequently to that, behaved itself quite disgracefully. And what they did was they ended up withdrawing also the invitation to the bishop. What they did is they went to see the chairman of the board and the president of the college, went to see Bishop McManus and suggested that his presence might be a distraction at the college commencement. Now, this is probably the first time in the history of the Catholic Church in the United States that a Catholic bishop has been disinvited to a commencement ceremony at a Catholic college because he attempted to preserve the Catholic identity of that institution. Now, of course, when they say who would be a distraction, he would obviously be a distraction from Anna Maria College's core values of favorable media coverage and institutional fundraising. That's what they were worried about. They were worried about protests. They were worried about perhaps some kind of withdrawal of contributions or donations. And it just is absolutely disgraceful. It was an act of treachery. It was an act of complete cowardice, and it was an act of really essentially of defiance towards the magisterium of the Church. So again, I think it really speaks to the issue that these colleges were created for and by Catholics to provide an education infused with the principles of the Catholic religion, and instead they've been taken over by a group of modernist religious orders, secularized faculty and administrators, and dissidents. And faithful Catholics have been dispossessed of their own institutions. And it's time we started to reclaim them. As I said, they were built for us, they were built by our ancestors, they were built to promote the Catholic religion, and instead they're in the hands of these quislings. So that was very sad. So what happened subsequent to that was, at least, however, in the Worcester case, as I said, as unfortunate as that turned out, at least Mrs. Kennedy was not given a platform. And by the way, this is the position of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops since 2004, since their statement, Catholics in Politics, is that persons should not be given awards, honors, or platforms, in other words, speaking positions, if they repudiate fundamental Catholic moral teachings, if they act, I think, in defiance of Catholic moral teaching. Now, here we have Mrs. Kennedy, again, clearly a supporter of legal abortion, a very disingenuous, in my view, supporter of legal abortion, a supporter of contraception, a supporter of same-sex marriage. So the message, of course, anyone is sending, whether it's Anna Maria College in the initial invitation or it's Boston College Law School, is one of infidelity and of indifference to Catholic moral teaching. It's conveying the impression that the mass murder of preborn children, 1 million a year from surgical and medical abortions, 1.3 million from surgical and medical abortions alone, God knows how many from chemical abortifacients, is an acceptable position. Support for this is an acceptable position within a respectable position within the Catholic community. And of course, it's telling future legislators and future policymakers and future judges and future attorneys in the case of BC law that this is far less important. That faithfulness to the Catholic religion and the principles of the Catholic religion are far less important than the higher values of celebrity and affluence and political power and professional success. So it sends a very, very a message that's entirely antithetical to the Catholic spirit and to the Christian spirit. Now, sadly, Boston College Law School went ahead with the commencement with Victoria Kennedy as the commencement
Now, they
speaker.
supposedly did not give her a diploma.
Well, so what? I mean, this is a distinction.
They gave her the platform.
This is a distinction without a difference. The bishop's statement says awards, honors, and platforms, and she was clearly given a platform. And even if it wasn't in the bishop's statement, clearly, again, this is a person that believes that 54 million dead children from surgical and medical abortion alone isn't enough, and that the killing should continue. So this is an appalling position to take, and future generations will look back upon this period as the Dark Ages, as a period of barbarism and inhumanity. And this is someone that is an advocate for this barbarism and inhumanity. And Boston College Law School went ahead with this. And one of the very sad things here is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, Sean O'Malley, who is the chairman-elect of the Committee on Pro-Life Activities of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which means he's the chief spokesman for the pro-life position within the Catholic Church in the United States, said absolutely nothing about Victoria Kennedy's speaking at Boston College. Now, his suffragan, remember how the Catholic Church, the hierarchy is organized. Every archbishop is a metropolitan who also oversees a province of bishops. So the Bishop of Worcester is the suffragan bishop. He's the subordinate bishop of the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston. So here one of his suffragans was willing to speak out against Victoria Kennedy at Anna Maria College. Yet the metropolitan, the metropolitan Cardinal Archbishop, was unwilling to speak out. And the Metropolitan Cardinal Archbishop is the chief pro-life spokesman for the Catholic Church in the United States. I think this is in some ways a worse scandal than even Mrs. Kennedy going to BC.
You say he's the pro-life elect. Can the USCCB, can they withdraw that?
No, they're not going to do that.
Because of the contrast between what Bishop McManus did, which was the right thing, and what O'Malley did, which was just turn and look the other way.
And it's actually worse than that. There's more hypocrisy to this. Both Jack Dunn, who was the spokesman for Boston College, and Terence Donlin, who was the pro-abortion. Terence Donlin, who's the spokesman for the Archdiocese of Boston, used to be the press aide to Rhode Island Governor Bruce Sunland, who was, of course, a supporter of abortion and same-sex marriage. So you have a pro-abortion political aide as the spokesman for the Archdiocese of Boston, a completely unfathomable position as far as I can see, an unfathomable appointment. John Walsh, who served under Cardinal Law, was a very loyal, faithful Catholic and Opus Dei cooperator, someone who was a very, very Orthodox Catholic, willing to defend the Church at all times. And here you have, again, an aide to a pro-abortion governor who is now the spokesman. And by the way, Terence Donlin's brother is President Obama's national security advisor, who's a member of the president's cabinet. So he's hardly in a position to speak out against, say, the Obama mandate, with his brother serving as a cabinet officer for President Obama. And his other brother, by the way, is a counselor to Vice President Biden. But that's neither here nor there. But both Jack Dunn, the spokesman for BC, and Terence Donlin, the spokesman for the Archdiocese of Boston, actually had the audacity to cite the 2004 bishop's statement. And when asked by reporters, they say, well, everyone should go by that statement. But here's the case where BC is openly defying the statement, and the Archdiocese of Boston is failing to enforce the statement. Yet both their spokesmen make reference to the statement. Again, it's chutzpah this is of just an egregious, extraordinary, over-the-top character.
What can we as Catholics do? We're sitting in the pew, we see this, well, it's cognitive dissonance, I'll say that much. You're saying, wait a second, I thought we were supposed to do this, and they're doing that.
I'd let Rome know, because it's useless letting the Archdiocese know. It's useless letting Boston College know. We know of somebody who called Boston College, a graduate who had received both undergraduate and graduate degrees from BC, called and to complain about Victoria Kennedy's selection, and he was referred to the director of marketing. So it's all fundraising for BC. In other words, there was a fundraising problem here. A potential donor might not give us money because of this. That's how they view it. It's complete prostitution, really, at Boston College. There's no Catholicity there. There's no loyalty to the faith there.
I'd like to. My university, which was Georgetown University, we had Catherine Sebelius come and speak, and there was an uproar amongst the alumni, but she still spoke there anyways. Yeah. Is it because these universities are now corporations, the Land O'Lakes Agreement, and they're not answerable to the Pope?
Well, no. Part of it is correct in the sense that they sold out they made a Faustian bargain with the government in the late 1960s. to receive federal funds and therefore downplay their Catholic identity, something called the Land Lakes Agreement. And as a result, in 1973, Boston College went from being controlled by the New England province of the Society of Jesus to something called the Trustees of Boston College Incorporated. It became a kind of a separate civil corporation. But it isn't just the Land Lakes Agreement. It isn't just the desire for federal funds. It's also the Jesuit order, which runs both BC and Georgetown, is just depraved at this point. I mean, it's a haven for heresy and for homosexuality. It's probably one of the most corrupt religious orders in the church. And Pope John Paul II attempted to do something about it. He appointed a delegate to oversee it, and eventually they had a new election, and his people were defeated in that election, and the old liberals were brought back. And the Pope seemed to just give up after that. And of course, Pope Benedict still hasn't really even tackled this issue, though he has been insistent. Pope John Paul II, came up with Ex Cordia Ecclesiae, the statement about the fidelity and the Catholic identity of Catholic colleges and universities. And this is still an issue that has to be brought up really and enforced under the current Pope. But our Catholic universities and colleges, and even to extent our elite secondary schools like Boston College High School or Catholic Memorial, have really gone into a kind of a state of apostasy. They're being governed by liberals. They're being governed by dissidents. They're being governed by, frankly, heretics, people who don't believe in the moral teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, or find those teachings so unimportant that they'd rather fawn over some pro-abortion politician. BC Catholic Memorial had at their 50th anniversary their honored guest Mayor Thomas Menino. BC traditionally had on its board of trustees Lieutenant Governor Tom O'Neill, who of course was very strongly pro-abortion. Regis College had, I think, on their board of trustees former Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Murphy, another pro-abortion figure. Emmanuel College had former pro-abortion congressional candidate and Democratic State Committee Counsel James Roosevelt as one of their trustees. And of course, BC has had a long list of opponents, adversaries of the Catholic faith, BC and BC Law in their commencement speakers, including not only Victoria Kennedy, but Margaret Marshall, Janet Reno, former Clinton Education Secretary Richard Riley, the vicious anti-Catholic Orangeman bigot from Northern Ireland, David Trimble, all sorts of, the list can go on. They've had, Lieutenant Governor O'Neill as a spokesman in various forums there. So it's decades of treason, treachery, and apostasy at these institutions.
Is there briefly, because I want to get on to the Acushnet situation, is there anything that we can do to rectify it?
First of all, never give a Jesuit college or university any money, and never give any money to the Jesuits. They're, as he said, the most corrupt religious order in the Catholic Church today. They need to be reformed. They're far worse than any of the religious orders that existed at the time of the Reformation that had problems then. This is actually, the Jesuits, by the way, take a special fourth vow of loyalty to the Pope, and they seem to have taken a position completely antithetical to that fourth vow. And as I said, the problems the clergy had in the 16th century at the time of the Reformation were problems, the moral problems, the personal moral problems were in the natural order. These problems are are contra naturam, or contrary to nature, in the unnatural order. So never support Jesuit higher education. The other thing is, you just let Rome know. There's no use letting the American bishops know who are complicit here. Try to let the Holy See know that that there is a terrible corruption in Catholic higher education in this country, and that Ex Cordia Ecclesiae needs to be mandated, and we need to have people who are faithful Catholics. And this deprives the Catholic community of authentically Catholic institutions. It deprives Catholic parents of the right to see that their children get an Orthodox Catholic education. It deprives students of the full challenge of the Catholic faith. It's terrible. We wonder why so many young Catholics support abortion and support same-sex marriage. It's because they're learning it at our own Catholic institutions. If you see someone in their 20s that's running for office that is a BC graduate, you can bet they're going to be supporters of legal abortion. It's a scandal.
I see. Yeah. Now, recently in the papers, there was something going on down in the Fall River Diocese in Acushnet. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this is a serious, we're talking a great deal about religious freedom nowadays. This is a serious threat to religious freedom. A a very Orthodox parish, St. Francis Xavier Parish, in the town of Acushnet in the Diocese of Fall River, posted a sign for one day on a little message board they have. You know how many churches, Catholic and Protestant churches, have these little kind of minor, small billboards out front, message boards. And the message was that two men are friends, not spouses. They were just trying to make the point that support the traditional definition of marriage. This created an uproar in the media and among local homosexual activists. We saw there were obscenity-laced phone calls to the church, including at least one that threatened to burn the church down. There was a sign was nailed to the front fence of the church. And if you take hammer and nails to a neighbor's fence, that's vandalism. That's trespassing and vandalism. A sign was nailed to the front fence of the church saying, spread love, not hate, implying, of course, Catholic moral teaching is hate. Another sign was posted at the back door of the church saying, pray for death. And another sign was posted at the back door of the church making an obscene sexual reference to Our Lady, to the Blessed Mother, it gives you a really vile sign was put up, which gives you an idea of the extremism. These are the haters. If we arrived at the point in society where if you merely enunciate what everyone everywhere always believed for millennia, that marriage is an institution between a man and a woman, you are now accused of bigotry, hatred, homophobia, intolerance, prejudice, while people, of course, and then they went and they picketed the church on Sunday. Well, now who pickets a house of worship on the Sabbath? Again, this gives you an idea of who the haters are and who the extremists are. But it shows you these homosexual activists have absolutely no appreciation for the First Amendment. They have absolutely no respect or regard for the constitutional rights or the moral sensibilities of others. It shows you that their political instincts are entirely totalitarian. This started off 30 years ago about gay rights, supposedly ending discrimination in housing and employment against homosexuals. Not that there was any visible discrimination at that time against them, but this supposedly was about ending discrimination. Now it's become a kind of neo-fascist enterprise dedicated to suppressing, punishing, rebuking, and silencing and doing everything possible to inflict injury on anyone who supports traditional biblical morality. And again, this gives you an indication of exactly how totalitarian this movement is. The gay rights movement is not a democratic movement. It is not a movement that believes in a pluralist society, at least a pluralist society ideologically. It wants to impose its uniformity on everyone else. So now we have a Catholic Church being picketed on a Sunday morning because it actually had the temerity to suggest, as I said, what everyone believed for thousands of years, that marriage is between a man and a woman.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what has come of it? I know that
we
Fox
wrote,
News put up a brief.
Well, first of all, we wrote to Samuel Sutter, the district attorney of Bristol County, and pointed out that harassing someone in the exercise of their constitutional rights, such as freedom of speech or freedom of religion, is under Chapter 265 of the General Laws of the Commonwealth a crime, and under Chapter 434 of the Acts of 1990 is a hate crime. And we urged him to undertake an investigation for constitutional rights violations and for hate crimes. And we're still waiting to hear back, by the way, from Attorney General Sutter. WBZ Radio asked Attorney General Coakley, a district attorney Sutter, WBZ Radio, after an interview that they did with me, asked Attorney General Coakley if she would take action on it, and she bounced the ball to the district attorney of Bristol County. This is a very, very serious matter, and again, it's an example of exactly how intolerant the adversaries of the church are. Now, to the credit, the pastor and the people in that parish have not backed down. The sign was taken down, but it was taken down after a day simply because they were putting up information on the masses on Ascension Thursday, and they've been very, very adamant about maintaining the church's position. Nobody's apologized or done anything and made any kind of concessions to these people, and the pastor I think is very, very who should be commended. Monsignor O'Connor has said that. We don't hate anybody, but this episode clearly shows how much we're hated because of our moral beliefs, which of course are the moral beliefs held by anyone. By the way, 20 years ago, in 1991, I debated David Scondrus, the homosexual city councilor, on the David Brudnoy radio show, and he denied that he supported same-sex marriage. It was about domestic partners. And he said, no, if we wanted to file a same-sex marriage bill, we would. This is just about benefits. It has nothing to do with marriage. So a position that homosexual activists themselves denied 20 years ago, if you don't go along with it now, you're a bigot and a homophobe. Yeah.
Well, CJ, our time unfortunately is up. I'm sure you could talk quite a lot about this and intelligently, which I very much appreciate, and I appreciate the historical perspective that you give too. Well, folks, we hope you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Stay tuned next week for another interesting show of Life Matters. Take care.